Story 1. I have a client who inherited some money from his grandmother, about $150,000. He is in his 20s, so I was certain he would blow it all. Sure enough, he came in and said he needed the cash for a business opportunity that he and a friend were starting. He fits the stereotype of a party guy, living in South Beach and using the word bro frequently. I assumed this situation would lead to him squandering his inheritance and being broke within the year. The guy pleaded to keep his account open, swearing he would put the money back. I obliged. Months went by, and I saw an alert that a wire transfer had come into his account for $150,000. I was pleasantly surprised that he kept his word. The next month, there was another transfer for $250,000, followed by another $250,000, and then another. In our business, we are required to discuss with the client how the funds are being deposited and where they originate, as mandated by U.S. regulations. So I called him. It turned out that he and a friend went down to Miami and used all his inheritance to buy Ferraris, Lamborghinis, and other exotic sports cars. However, there was a catch. None of them worked. They had all been flooded, and the insurance companies had totaled them. They buy these exotic vehicles that are non-functional, polish them up, and then put them on a wrecker, driving them to people's houses for a short rental period. There is significant demand from aspiring influencers who want to take pictures with exotic cars. He charges $1,000 for 4 hours with the vehicle in your driveway, allowing you to take as many videos and pictures as you want. After the rental period, he loads the vehicle back onto his wrecker and takes it elsewhere. The last time I spoke with him, they had purchased a salvage jet and were in the process of refurbishing it. His entire business model revolves around people spending their hard-earned cash to look cool on the internet. It blows my mind, but at least he is doing well financially. Story 2. I remember a man in Berlin who sold stuffed animal holidays. People from America would pay him and send their stuffed animals, and he would take them on a tour of Berlin in an old Soviet-era car, capturing pictures along the way. In the end, he would return the stuffed animal to its owner along with the pictures from the trip. Story 3. I met a man who creates illuminated manuscripts for museums and wealthy collectors. He processes his own vellum from sheepskin, makes his own pens, ink, paints, and pigments, and handles all the gilding and binding by hand. Previously, he painted for Magic, The Gathering, with Ursa's Mitre being his most famous card. Story 4. I knew a barber who lived and worked out of a recreational vehicle. He would drive into a town, find a parking lot near a busy area, and get permission to stay there. He had charisma and a unique style, but was also a mild and kind person. He worked when he wanted to and always had a line of customers. People accepted that he didn't keep regular hours or appointments. Apparently, he had done this for years. Once he got bored in a location, he would leave and find a new city. He was one of the coolest people I've ever met. Story 5. I'm not sure if this is still a thing, but when I went back to college after the army, a couple of guys I went to school with went to China for a couple of months and got jobs where they basically stood around in suits holding briefcases in the lobbies of different corporate offices. Apparently, in China, it made your business look extra legitimate if there were some young white businessmen hanging around. I'm not sure if they worked directly for the companies or if they worked for an agency, but they said the pay was decent and it was pretty easy. Story 6. My cousin lives in New York City and works for a company that maintains corporate rooftop beehives. Companies that own skyscrapers want the environmentally friendly image of having bees on the roof, but they obviously do not want to do it themselves, so my cousin takes care of it. She is not wealthy, but she makes a comfortable living in a big city doing something quite unique. Story 7. I was located in an industrial park. 2 individuals moved next door to start a handmade pool table business without any experience. They were financially struggling and lived in the warehouse. The craftsmanship of the wooden components was poor, and they invited me to join them, but I declined. They still managed to sell some pool tables. After a year, they secured a home. About 10 years later, they opened a large showroom. After 20 years, they became a national brand. Story 8. My former dentist became a dentist after being a beekeeper for most of his life. He left beekeeping in his 50s. Story 9. I knew a man who was overweight and conventionally unattractive. He worked as a novelty stripper. If he arrived at a gig and the audience offered him more money than the original contract, he would stop the music, put his clothes back on, and leave. Apparently, he made pretty good money doing it, too. Story 10. My sister owns a nail salon after working for others in hair cutting. She has a side job with funeral homes, providing haircuts and manicures for their clients. Story 11. I remember chatting with an older man who mentioned that he made his money from his YouTube channel. It was around 10 to 12 years ago, so I didn't even know you could earn money from YouTube. He told me about his videos, where he repairs household appliances, and many people watch them. I looked him up that evening, and he had a large following. I watched a few of his videos. He would take a broken appliance and attempt to repair it. Although he didn't always know what he was doing and often couldn't fix it, people loved him. He would take things apart and say, "I wonder what would happen if I put a screwdriver in there," or remark, "That little part looks burnt. Let's hit it with a hammer and see." I just looked him up again, and there is no sign of him. A few people have asked for the channel details, but I'm not sure I should share that. I can't find any trace of him anymore. I don't remember the channel name, only his name. He took it quite seriously, and I don't want to offend him since I've mentioned he didn't always know what he was doing. Story 12. I met a man in the United Kingdom who flew his hawk once a month over my office parking lot to keep small birds away and prevent them from pooping on the cars. He spent his days going from office park to office park, flying his hawk. I didn't have the heart to tell him my son thinks birds aren't real. Story 13. There is a service in Michigan that will drive your car for a fee over the Mackinac Bridge, which connects Lower and Upper Michigan. Some people are just too scared to do it. Story 14. I recorded sound effects for game and movie studios for many years and still do from time to time. Pretty much every sound you hear in a film or television show is recreated by sound designers. I supplied their raw materials, which involved traveling to point microphones at everything from obscure historical artifacts to everyday objects like doors and cabinets. If you've watched shows like The Office and Mr. Robot, you've heard some of my work. Story 15. I met a professional balloon artist who specializes in children's parties and events. His primary source of income comes from creating giant balloon sculptures for conventions and festivals. I know a few people who travel across the country working at Renaissance fairs. Story 16. I know a woman who turned hugs into a business. She sells hugs, nothing more, nothing less. From what I understand, they can be somewhat erotic, but still just a hug. They can also be comforting, providing a long, warm embrace for those who need it and are willing to pay for it. Whatever the need for hugs, she's there. Story 17. I have a friend I have known since I was 5 who would do anything random as long as it paid well. One week he was installing a roof, the next he was fixing a tractor, then he was flipping a house, and after that he was doing lawn care. He hustled like that 7 days a week. I couldn't live like that, but he made enough to start a roofing business, bought 2 restaurants, and purchased rental properties. He is now quite wealthy. Story 18. I worked with the nicest girl ever, just an all-around sweet person. While chatting, she mentioned that her husband owned his own business. After a while, she finally admitted that he made custom sex toys for people. I said good for him if he can make a living off of it. Story 19. There is a man in New Jersey whose father showed him the secret location of baseball mud. Major League Baseball baseballs are treated with mud to remove the gloss and shine from new baseballs, giving them an off-white color. This man has exclusive rights to mud every Major League Baseball baseball. He guards the location of the mud, and no one else knows where it comes from. I am not sure if he makes a living from it, but he definitely makes good money from this niche trade. Story 20. I know a man who started a small shop in his garage to print pizza menus for local pizzerias. That was all he printed, and now he owns a large shop that exclusively produces pizza menus across the country, making a significant profit. Who would have thought? Story 21. I have a friend who is extremely wealthy. He started by reclaiming and selling used sewage pipes, specifically the large concrete ones. When someone was demolishing a site, he would ask for the items. Most of the time, it was free since he was doing them a favor by hauling it away. Story 22. A guy I met lived in a guest house belonging to a wealthy family and received a moderate salary to perform various tasks for them. He did not have a specific role like house cleaning, maintenance, or nannying, although he would occasionally do all of those. It seemed more like he was assigned random tasks, such as researching boats they might want to purchase or having spare house keys made. He was about 35 years old and appeared perfectly content to continue this lifestyle indefinitely. Story 23. I saw a main event at a club in Argentina where the headliner sprayed milk directly from her body into the crowd. Story 24. A person at my company holds a position that no longer exists. There are a few others like him. He arrives at 6 a.m., spends a few hours there, and then goes home. He hasn't actually worked in years but has a contract that must be honored. Story 25. The Bristol Museum car park attendant used to sit in a small booth and collect parking fees for the local council. He worked there for years. One day, he didn't show up for work. After a few days, the regular visitors became concerned and called the council to check on him. It turned out that the car park for the museum was free and the council had no idea anyone was charging for it. This attendant had collected parking fees for years, set up his own booth, and then disappeared. Story 26. My job has a large dumpster, and there is a service that comes to grind up all the trash in it, so it doesn't need to be picked up as often. It is about 30 feet by 10 feet, so it does not just get emptied. They pick up the full dumpster and drop off an empty one. The grinder is a large truck with an arm and a barrel-shaped crusher with numerous teeth on it. It looks like fun, honestly. Story 27. There was a guy in my high school who was obsessed with Pokemon cards. He would take the rare ones he collected and sell them online to people trying to complete their collections. I'm not sure how much he made, but he would go to the store every day to buy packs in search of rare cards to sell. Story 28. Professional cuddler. I saw someone in Japan hugging another person in a public park for hours. We noticed them hugging when we arrived and, hours later, they were still hugging when we left. A local friend mentioned it was likely a professional paid hugging session. Story 29. Prospecting is making a comeback. The revenue comes from selling a vision, advertising, and merchandising. Story 30. There is a man near Sedona who occasionally collects a few buckets of dirt. He takes it home and has his children sort it into different sizes of sand, pebbles, and rocks. He packages it in small containers and sells it to model train and miniature enthusiasts. Story 31. A city parking service charges less than monthly parking permits. The service moves cars in time-limited spots throughout the day. Occasionally, a car gets ticketed, and the owner pays the fine because the profits justify it. Story 32. I worked with a guy whose father supported himself with a high-paying, month-long job as Santa Claus at a Las Vegas casino and as an umpire for adult slow-pitch softball in the summer. Story 33. One of our friends was in a friends with benefits relationship with a man who enjoyed being pegged. She searched extensively for harnesses that fit snugly on her, held their toys securely in place during the act, and were of good quality overall. Unable to find any that met her standards, she decided to sew her own, as she has a degree in fashion design. Word spread, and she began making some for friends. She eventually started selling them online and has been quite successful. Story 34. There is a quiet man who wears thick glasses. He steals shopping carts, repairs them, and sells them back to the stores. Story 35. My neighbor has 4 jobs. She does hair, sells clean urine, prepares kids' school lunches, and I know for sure she cleans homes. She is a true hustler. Story 36. I saw a job advertisement on Indeed once for a pooper scooper that paid $26 to $28 per hour. All they have to do is scoop poop. Story 37. I lived in a city where Public Works had a position for a driver. The driver did not work on site. He just waited and watched. He did not refuel the truck or clean or repair it. He only drove the truck 2 or 4 times a day as needed. Due to the union, the city was required to maintain the role. It was highly sought after, and the senior workers often jostled for the opportunity to perform this challenging job. The position was a holdover from a time when very few workers knew how to operate the trucks of that era. My understanding is that there used to be a well-paid position for a farrier, a horse hoof specialist, which took 20 years to eliminate after the city got rid of its last horse. Story 38. Someone asked a similar question in an entrepreneur group on Reddit a while back, and the most memorable answer was from a person who bought a life-size dinosaur costume and charged for special appearances at schools and other educational events in his spare time. He made $30,000 in 3 months. The man was making a significant profit by role-playing as a dinosaur. Story 39. I once had a fascinating conversation with a gentleman who traded oranges for a living. Story 40. I had a friend years ago who got paid to pick up tire scraps from the highway. They had to document the location and size, then catalog and submit the information. Story 41. A friend's partner used to rehabilitate penguins in South Africa, which sometimes involved creating small mobility aids for them. Another person I met worked as a costume librarian. The company had a large warehouse of costumes related to various occupations and time periods. They rented them out to movie productions that needed numerous police officers or to dress 100 people as if they lived in the 1940s or the 1500s, among other themes. Story 42. Selling fake poker money for real cash. I had a roommate about 15 years ago who played online poker on Facebook and became quite good at it. He would sometimes chat with other players and get to know them. Some were well off but addicted to gambling. They begged him to set up a game so that he would lose some fake millions to them to gain levels, and they would send him real money for that. Please, will you lose 20 million for me? I lost it all and am still at beginner level. Tomorrow evening at 9. Okay, that would be 200 euros. He set up many games and managed to live on these profits for a whole year, even financing a trip abroad with his girlfriend. For some people, he felt pity and tried to convince them to quit. For others, there was no mercy. At some point, his girlfriend dumped him and his morale dropped, so he lost everything and even tried to buy fake money with his own real money to get back in the game. Fortunately, he realized that this was a really bad choice and quit altogether. Story 43. House managers work for wealthy individuals and prepare the house for the 2 weeks each year when the owner arrives, ensuring it is ready for living. Story 44. I worked for a company doing inside sales for 3 years until COVID-19. I spent most days on the phone and emailing, while we had an outside sales representative who rarely came into the office. I hardly saw any activity from her in our customer relationship management system. She would visit 1 to 5 dental offices a day, and that was it. We were in a major city, and it was mostly her territory. 90% of the visits lasted 2 to 10 minutes at most, consisting of small talk, making a pitch, leaving some baked goods, and then leaving. She mentioned that 2 days a week she did very little work, maybe putting in 30 minutes. 2 days she was out visiting, which took her 2 to 3 hours if she planned her route well. 1 day a week was dedicated to administrative tasks, logging meetings and planning for the following week. In total, she worked about 15 hours a week. Additionally, she had a company credit card and the company often paid for trips to great places for conventions. I began asking about assisting with outside accounts and visiting other cities we did not reach. I did that for over a year and made a name for myself in the industry. Fast forward a few years, I worked with a couple of startups and then tried returning to the industry as an outside sales representative. I was hired by one of our competitors, which had a larger budget, a better team, and improved software. Now I am the outside sales representative. I probably work closer to 25 hours a week. It's a blast. I really did it. Story 45. I knew a girl who was a financial dominatrix. Wealthy men would call her, and she would demand that they buy things for her while degrading them. Then she would resell whatever she didn't actually want. Story 46. A woman who practiced play therapy would gather a group of individuals, referred by their therapist, in a park. She supplied bubble wands, jump ropes, games, and other activities, and they would play for several hours. I was impressed. Story 47. I lived in Beijing in the late 1990s. I knew a person there who would buy a truckload of new silk carpets, then drive that truck into Mongolia, Xinjiang, Tajikistan, and look for yurts. He would offer to trade the nice new rugs for the old, worn rugs in the yurts. Then he would return to Beijing to sell his truckload of traditional, and possibly antique rugs to dealers. This process was repeated. Story 48. Professional sheath cleaners. The equestrian world is a unique environment. Part of equine hygiene for male horses involves cleaning their sheath and penis regularly. Often, this task is performed by a veterinarian, but some individuals have turned it into a primary source of income. It is a challenging job, but it can be quite profitable if one is not too squeamish. Story 49. I watched a program years ago about two men who made a living as private security traps for casinos in Las Vegas. The first man was a lanky, nerdy-looking individual who made himself seem like an ideal victim. He would act drunk, display some cash, and make it clear he was worth mugging. He wore a wire so that when he was attacked, the details would be relayed to his partner. The partner was a hulking ex-Marine built like a freight train. Since they wanted to get muggers arrested, they needed to wait until the mugger had physically engaged the first man. As soon as that happened, the second man would charge out from somewhere nearby, subduing the mugger and calling the police. It seemed like an enjoyable job for the second man, but less so for the first, who essentially got paid to endure regular beatings. When an interviewer asked him, while he had visible bruises from his latest encounter, whether he enjoyed his job, he shrugged and replied, "It's a living." Story 50. I sold a guitar to a man who had a business scooping dog waste from people's yards who didn't want to do it themselves. He did really well with it, too. Story 51. I met a man whose job was to test different mulch compositions. The Navy paid him 5 days a week to move mulch around a small yard. It seemed like they forgot about him until he retired. Story 52. I knew a man who created glass dildos. He was a glass artist and would rent space at the glass shop twice a month for 4 hours each time. He made around 100 dildos in that period with the help of a couple of assistants, mostly gathering glass and forming the dildos using a cherry wood mold. The next day, he would return to perform cold shop work, which took around 8 hours. He worked about 25 hours a month and earned well into the 6 figures. Story 53. I met a guy who had a job that made me incredibly jealous. He called himself a geek facilitator. Essentially, this guy drives around the country from convention to convention, getting comics autographed for people who cannot take time off work to do it themselves or cannot travel, while also hunting for rare and valuable comics on his clients' wish lists, as well as picking them up for himself to resell for a profit. His clients paid for convention entry, the cost of autographs, travel expenses, plus what they paid him for his time. Story 54. In Bogota, Colombia, the traffic is bad. In a particularly busy part of the city, there is a main street with a traffic light. Trying to enter the main street from the side street before the traffic light was impossible because the cars on the main street wouldn't simply let you in. There was a man who would stand on the main street when the traffic light was red, right before the side street, allowing cars from the side street to pass. Then he would quickly collect tips from the thankful drivers. I admired that man, as I often found myself in the side street position. Story 55. I braid horsehair professionally. Rated shows typically have a lot of glitz and glamour. While not technically a rule by most sanctioned show standards, braiding is a social norm that many riders and exhibitors follow. The hours are unconventional, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m., but we are essentially independent contractors, with the going rate being $80 per mane and $40 per tail. Some individuals can braid 10 to 12 horses a night, so it adds up quickly. Story 56. Through a friend in London, I know a man who makes a living doing gold leaf painting. He is in high demand for stately homes as it is a dying profession. A few years ago, he was working for the Queen at Windsor Castle and ended up getting arrested by the police. He parked his van outside the castle and refused to move it when asked by an officer because he needed to get all his equipment inside. He told the officer he was working for the Queen, doing gold leaf painting, and showed him his permit. But the officer did not accept it and arrested him on the spot. The general message he received was not to challenge the police in Windsor. After being released from the police cell, he went home for the day and enjoyed drinks at his local pub by lunchtime, sharing his experience of going from Windsor Castle to a police cell. He still charged the Queen for his full working day, which meant she ended up paying for his arrest and the loss of a day's work to paint her ceilings with gold leaves. Story 57. I met a person whose job was to help families choose Western names for their children when they came over to study. They expanded their services to include anyone who wanted to select a Western name. They made a surprisingly good amount of money. Story 58. I met a falconer hired by grocery stores to use their falcon to chase away the starlings that frequent the parking lots. The falcon killing a few of the birds causes the entire flock to relocate temporarily. Story 59. I met a billionaire who took some industrial waste metal shavings he got for free and sold them to the military as an adhesive or lubricant. He became rich beyond his wildest dreams overnight. Now he is bored and spends his money on extravagant things like a lazy river or moat that surrounds his 40-acre property. Story 60. Not really a living, but 5 years ago my wife convinced me to get one of those $10,000 multi-needle embroidery machines. Her niche is making clothes for Elf on the Shelf. She creates costumes, disguises, and sweaters with pop culture references. It usually picks up from around October to December every year, but it averages about $15,000 per year, with a profit margin of around 90%. I do her taxes. I periodically take a Friday night to stay up late and help her create a batch of the more popular designs throughout the year. This year, we are making 400 banana costumes to prepare for the Christmas rush. We are trying to find other markets to explore so that we can earn enough to make it a sustainable income. She used to buy stickers from a different Etsy shop for her packages, like danger, cuteness inside. The shop owner had a talent for graphic design and invested in equipment to print on blank sheets of sticker paper, then cut out the sticker outlines. Her shop took off so much that she eventually needed to get a small factory and hire employees. She was reportedly selling over $3 million worth of stickers annually. An active participant on an internet forum I used to frequent had a son who made a living selling baseball cards online. He would buy large lots from wholesalers and livestream as he went through them. People would send him money sight unseen for blocks, which refers to purchasing all the cards for a specific team, such as the Red Sox, for a set amount of money like $500 or $2,000. Buyers could either get a great deal or waste their money on less desirable cards. It was essentially a gamble, but not technically. The young man was reportedly making mid to high six figures doing this. Story 61. There was a girl selling stray cats in her apartment complex. The sad thing is that I wanted one, but I didn't feel I should have to pay a fee. She wasn't even feeding them. They had different prices and names that she assigned to them. Story 62. I know a person who purchased several website domain names at a low price in the late 1990s and early 2000s. He holds onto them until he can sell them for a much higher price than he paid. He has a regular job, but selling domain names makes up a significant part of his income. Story 63. Two former alcohol and drug addicts who recovered established a drug testing business serving companies that required drug and alcohol-free employees. They live in a large house. Story 64. I had a coworker whose husband repairs pin-setting machines in bowling alleys all up and down the East Coast. Story 65. This person's sole job is painting pinstripes on Rolls-Royce vehicles. Story 66. I had a brief stint as a professional cuddler. I would cuddle with people for an hour or two, usually just an hour. I wouldn't do it again, though, since I was always worried about getting into a dangerous situation. I had a guy lick my ear twice. The first time I wasn't sure if what I thought happened actually did happen. But then he did it again, and I decided to quit soon after. Plus, men would often ask if we could cuddle naked, or they would try their luck and ask for sex. No, they basically wanted an escort for cheaper rates. Story 67. I was a photocopier trainer. I traveled from business to business, teaching them how to use their copiers. This was 5 years ago, and no one could believe it was my job. Story 68. I was chatting with a woman who is a postpartum nutritionist. She prepares meals for breastfeeding women. Honestly, I'm not sure if she cooks the meals herself or simply provides a meal plan. Story 69. I knew a couple who would collect deer semen and send it in the mail to people who requested it. Story 70. My wife has a childhood friend who works in heritage building restoration and also makes and sells dolls. Story 71. I have a friend who somehow got into clothing design. He was able to pivot and start specializing in stripper costumes. He would travel to local strip clubs and sell to the dancers. He succeeded in many ways. Story 72. I met a man in a bar who said he made custom lighting. He showed me pictures of boulders of quartz and other minerals that he extracts from a mine he owns, followed by pictures of gold mining he does as well, with nuggets 3 times the size of my fist. Later, he showed me images of his lapidary workshop, which is full of things most people will never see. He displayed a light he made from a piece of quartz or another crystal. A sphere over 4 feet in diameter, carved and smoothed inside and out. He is also a sculptor, with giant horses and stone statues everywhere. He has a shop where he sells custom furniture, art, and lighting. He sells items for a fortune, but everything is legitimate. A modern-day Michelangelo just had a few beers with me and blew my mind. I told him that if he ever wants an apprentice, he should call me, and I gave him my information. Story 73. I am an actor for film and television, and on one set, they hired someone to teach us how to use a bong in a scene with fake marijuana. He goes to any set that needs a bong instructor. Story 74. The kid on TikTok and Instagram films himself watching the lights turn off at stores and restaurants after they close. Story 75. I know of 2 people who made great livings in unusual ways. One man runs a company that contracts to install hand sanitizer, soap, paper towel, and toilet paper dispensers in large businesses like hospitals and schools. These companies contract with a supplier for their products, and the supplier provides the dispensers for free, as each supplier has a proprietary dispenser. His company handles the installations. He got into this by starting in a sales position with one of the suppliers and then realizing there was a gap in the market for installation services. The other individual achieved significant success during the COVID-19 pandemic. He had previously been in a sales-oriented business and recognized the shift toward online shopping. He partnered with one of his clients to open a corrugation production facility. He is probably the richest person I have ever met personally, and he made his fortune from cardboard boxes. Story 76. My dad was an independent debt collector, not the kind that sends a crew of enforcers but somewhat legitimate. He would go into financial institutions, usually credit unions, and discuss charged-off accounts, charging them by the hour plus 40% of the recovered funds. The larger the institution, the higher his hourly rate. Larger institutions often paid him up to $100 per hour. This was in the days before search engines and smartphones. He had his techniques, such as tapping telephone lines and having contacts at health insurance and utility companies who would provide him with the information he needed to find the debtors. The company employees giving him personal information is why I described him as somewhat legitimate, as he did have a business name, but it was others illegally providing him with the details he required. Story 77. I had a coworker whose father was a multimillionaire from creating and selling high-end pottery. I found his website and learned that he sold a piece to the Smithsonian. It was interesting. Story 78. My wife knows a woman who spends all her money on buying the Christmas toy every year and then sells it to desperate parents in the final days before Christmas at an enormous markup. She clears at least $50,000 in profit every year. Story 79. I have a friend from 30 years ago. He was a stand-up comedian at the time, and he is still a comedian today. He is not homeless. Story 80. An OnlyFans administrator is a gay man who manages accounts for several female creators. These creators pay him a monthly fee to run their accounts and interact with their subscribers. They provide the content, and he handles everything else, including captions and messaging. Story 81. I am surprised I haven't seen anyone mention the companies that have people stand in line for you. I saw one on a television show once. A man had lost his job and agreed to wait in line for an iPhone or shoes for his friend in exchange for $20. He quickly realized that some people would pay good money to receive limited goods without camping in front of a store overnight, so he started a business. Story 82. There is a lady I know whose online persona is June Dion, and she creates clothing for virtual characters. Most of us who create and sell items in virtual communities do it as a side job, but for her, it is her full-time profession. Story 83. We met a man in Old Town, Albuquerque, who looked like Walter White from Breaking Bad. He allowed our grandson to pretend to punch him for a photo, which was quite funny. We didn't pay him, the business he worked for did. It was the candy lady, the ones who made the rock sugar candy for the blue meth in the show. Story 84. Emily Gralai is the chief curiosity correspondent for the Field Museum, and I believe that is probably the greatest job anyone could ever have. Story 85. A friend edits a couple of metal music and culture blogs and publishes Muslim-themed science microfiction for a living. How that equates to a living wage in the Washington, D.C. area boggles my mind, but they have made it work for years and never seem worried about money. Story 86. I once did some minor construction work for a company that edited videos for adult films. It was amusing walking around what looked like a typical startup office and seeing everyone's computers with adult content on them. Story 87. Back in the 1980s, I answered a personal ad that turned out to be from a man who made his living as a dinosaur illustrator. I talked to him on the phone and decided to pass. He came across as a bit pompous and went on at length about how answering machines actually slow the flow of communication. To be fair, I was pretty ambivalent about dating in the first place and mostly went through the motions to try to feel normal. In the early 2000s, I visited Dinosaur Depot in Cannon City, Colorado. One of the postcards I bought there turned out to be his illustration. Just a week or so ago, I saw him quoted in the media, praising the authenticity of something or another. He is basically famous in certain circles. Story 88. I used to be a professional cuddler. I am quite plush, so most of my clients sought a nurturing experience. Story 89. I worked with a man who had several pilot licenses. He had a job with an insurance company stealing planes from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. These were planes owned by drug cartels that had been impounded by the agency and subsequently claimed. If for any reason the insurer ended up paying out for the claim, though I have no idea what scenario might lead to that, it apparently happened. They would fly this man over the compound, drop him in by parachute, and he would steal the plane back. That was quite unique. Story 90. A friend of mine invited me to his place for a party. It was intense with a lot of drinking and marijuana, and we all crashed on the couch. He woke up early the next day because he said he had to work, but we could stay. It turned out he was a moderator for TikTok, and we could all hang out in his bedroom while he worked. 80% of the job involved him gaming on his computer, and then a video would come up that was usually shorter than a minute, which he would watch. I suppose someone has to review every single video on that platform because most of them were not entertaining at all, and he just had to ensure there wasn't any extreme content, which I never saw the entire time. He was very hungover, but I was impressed with his ability to make a living this way. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.